Hello and welcome to the Voice of Reason podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guests are two very special guests. One is Debra So, who is a columnist, a journalist, and a sex researcher. She previously was a sex researcher before she jettisoned the academy and went into writing. And her book is The End of Gender, and it goes through point by point and discusses different myths about sex and gender and the related constructs around relationships and identity and the political correctness culture that is suppressing the free flow of truth through our conversations on this matter. The other guest is Abigail Shrier, and her book is Irreversible Damage, which takes a very close look at the ways in which young women are being affected by transgender or gender ideology. In this conversation, we talk about their research and their writing and their experience exploring these ideas, and we get into the nitty-gritty of what we can be doing as individuals to call out bad ideas when we come across them. So without further ado, here is Abigail Shrier and Dr. Debra So. Dr. So, where's your pop filter?
I took it off because people were so angry and saying, like, you don't need a pop filter with that microphone. It has a built-in pop filter. And I'm like, yeah, well, I still pop my peas, but I took it off just for, when there's a visual.
So here we are. Have you two spoken before?
No,
I actually don't think we have.
Time.
Yeah.
So how many interviews have you guys done just this summer on your books, like these remote things?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
So like twice a week or so or more?
Probably. In the beginning, it's more. I've spaced them out a bit more just because I don't want people to get sick of seeing me.
Yeah, it was certainly very intense for a while. It was. I think there was one day I had 7 interviews.
Wow.
So, yeah, I definitely was doing a lot of them.
And Abigail, your book was released on June 30th, if I recall correctly, right? I don't know why I know that date, but
June 30th.
And Debra, yours was a little later in August.
August 4th.
Yeah.
It came out, yeah.
And how's the reception been?
It's been really positive among people who've actually read the book. I can usually tell based on the criticism whether someone's actually read it or not. But I'm always open to feedback. I love hearing what people think about it. And it was a relief just to know that it did resonate with my readers and that people appreciate the information and that they felt that the science was written in a way that they could also understand it and make use of it in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's very, very accessible. What do you think is the idea that people are converging on, or what they're most seeing from the work, The End of Gender?
Probably that a lot of the things that they know to be true are still true, and that those things that they thought they had to relearn or think differently about, it's actually very much ideologically based, and that it's actually okay to say what you really think because it is the truth. I mean, even if you have an idea that goes against particular narratives, I think people should be able to talk about it and not have to worry about what the repercussions are going to be to the way people think of them, or if people are going to think they're hateful or whatever. But I think my sense is, it's just this collective sigh that people are realizing a lot of the information that they're being told more recently is not actually factually true. And so they don't feel, I guess, as alienated or as crazy.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen anything like this, this ideological or this suppressive of facts and truth?
In academia, definitely. Like I would say in the years when I was doing my PhD, when I finished, and it's gotten so much worse now. But we saw this coming for a while. I just didn't think it would ever reach this level in terms of how mainstream it is. And also the fact that now these ideas are becoming really accepted in our culture, and they're not, to question them is considered, again, bigoted, which I didn't think it was ever going to take that level of meaning, I guess, or that it would be so taboo to talk about basic facts, especially biology. I didn't think biology would ever become something that's considered this contentious. And I think a lot of that is stemming from people who either don't fully understand it, they don't understand the scientific method, and that's why they find it threatening. I do think some people are operating from a position of trying to help certain communities, but this is definitely not the way you go about doing it.
Mm-hmm. And Abigail, you've been studying, in your book, you look into specifically about how transgender ideology is affecting young women, but you did a lot of interviews with a lot of different facets on the education front, on the therapy front, and then you get into how it's affecting young people. What's your thought of this as a new phenomenon, that this is something that you need to agree with, or how ideologically loaded it is?
It's shockingly loaded. I mean, I'm very grateful that the reception of my book was really good on the, sort of individual normal people level. So people reading it, liked the book, found, agreed with it, whatnot. But, I get a lot of, messages in my DMs about, I agree with your book. I did not find it prejudiced. Transgender adults reached out, all kinds of people, but I can't say so because I work for a company where I could be fired, a very woke company, or I'm the number, or my daughter's school, if they found out whatnot, the number of people in America today who feel that they can't say basic truths, right, is shocking. They can't say, a biological man is not a woman. I mean, that's hate speech or something. So we really have ended up in this very strange place. I know I said America, and obviously Deborah's in Canada. Sorry, I think this applies to much of the West. I'm sure. I don't.
Definitely does.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really stunning. I mean, these are private people who work in a company and literally are, please never use my name, because my company will fire me for saying that I like your book or, anything like it. It's so ridiculous. But if you look at, reviews, if you look at, response to the Joe Rogan show, it's overwhelmingly positive. And my DMs are full of even positive comments from transgender adults who are very lovely people and very sober. And they think what's going on with this sudden rush to transition teenage girls is a little insane, because let's be honest, it is. I mean, when you see a sudden spike like this, you have to ask what's going on. And that's all I sought to do.
Mm-hmm. Just last week, I believe, Mermaids, which is a very active, rather powerful advocacy group based in the UK, promoting LGBT issues, but it seems like they've been pretty heavy in the T part of their advocacy. It seems like they reversed their position on the statement that somebody is born in the wrong body. Did you guys see that? And what is your reaction to that? Is that like a sea change, or do you think it's a power play?
I've noticed that the people who are really excited about them seem to have quieted down quite a bit. I think they're sensing what's coming, and they don't want to be now, quote unquote, on the wrong side of history, even though those of us who are right have been called on the wrong side of history. So I think there's going to be more of that. Like my sense is with the trend in terms of when the truth does start to come out more and there are more detransitioners, because we do see this happening in the UK. It's happening over there first. It hasn't quite hit us over here in North America yet to the same extent. And I think when it does, people are just going to flip sides like that and pretend like, oh, well, we had no idea this was going to happen. And how could we have predicted this? And this is so terrible. And whereas, those of us who are shouting about this and trying to bring attention to it, we're going to be saying, oh, we've been calling this out for a long time, and you guys called us transphobic for doing so. So I think, it's the start of what's coming, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I just read today, they're trying to, the woke employees of Spotify are trying to get my episodes stripped off Joe Rogan. And even though outlets that report on this say controversial writer Abigail Shrier, well, I've never been a controversial writer before. I'm not a provocateur. I'm not someone who's out there. I mean, truly, the things that I say in my book, I think will come to seem very humdrum, in say 10 years of course, this was clearly, a fad. These numbers didn't make any sense, and it was worth exploring. But today, whenever they say my name, they now have to say controversial writer because anybody, everybody, even that's even what the nice outlets say about me. The others, obviously just call me a transphobe. But, it's like they have to brand you today because they're still so afraid. I agree with Debra. I think it's going to change.
However, what your book goes into, and you touch on this, Dr. So, but you devote an entire chapter to what's going on in schools, Abigail. And my local school, pushed out a transgender training, which is based on this idea that sex is assigned, but your gender is authentic and true. Your gender is some sort of platonic form. But basically what I'm trying to say is that it's really deeply embedded in our institutions of education, from primary school all the way up to college. So the way that it's going to change, I don't see it's going to change overnight. If these advocacy groups change course, it's still already implemented. How long is that going to play out?
It's going to have a profound effect on these children for a very long time. There's a lot of gender confusion. They're being pushed to consider that at very young ages, 5 years old, that that may be a girl in a boy's body or a boy in a girl's body and all this nonsense. And it's not going to stop in the schools, because the schools really do lag behind everything else. It's like my school, my kid's school implemented Common Core after, I think it was 5 or 8 years after every other school had hated it, and it was becoming discredited as a good, curriculum. I mean, the schools will lag behind, and unfortunately they will continue to push this stuff for a very long time. I mean, a lot of schools are just getting going. And we're seeing it. It's funny. Parents are awakening to this because they're finding out that their kids are being taught, that America was founded in 1619 in order to promote slavery and racism. And so parents are waking up to the fact that there's been a real woke takeover of even our school systems, not only our universities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing in Canada, like where I'm based in Toronto, in the province of Ontario. They're very sneaky about it, because even though the official curriculum doesn't say these particular things that are being taught, I mean, the teachers have some leeway in terms of what they choose to teach the kids in school. So even if all of this stuff ends up being discredited finally in a few years, they're still free. They have that room in terms of what they choose to teach the kids. And I don't think it's an ideology that they're going to give up on, because they recognize the power in getting children indoctrinated and thinking this way.
Why? What's so powerful about that? Or why would somebody be interested in doing that?
Because I think if you can mold the way children view, and you mold it in a way that's not based in anything real, you can control them. And you can control basically how they go forward in life and the way they think. I mean, I don't think it's about only gender, right? It's about also this larger anti-scientific theme that feeling is more important than reality or objective truth, that there maybe is no such thing as objective truth. And so once you teach children these things, they really are dependent on you, I think. You're not giving them the tools to think. They're dependent on you to tell them how to think or what to think.
And what's the outcome for this? Specifically in the gender and sexuality, what have you both seen? How does this affect young people and their development?
Well, they're totally lost, I would say. I mean, we even have comprehensive sex ed here. I am in favor of comprehensive sex ed. I do think it's important for children to learn about healthy human sexuality, obviously not to learn about having sex necessarily. It has to be age appropriate, but I do think that's helpful, because children who do receive comprehensive sex ed make better decisions about their sexual health. They do tend to delay when they begin having sex. They're more likely to use protection, things like that. But my issue is when it has these ideas that are not scientific. So when you're teaching this to children, I mean, I have a chapter in the book about sex and dating. There's even young adults are completely clueless when it comes to how to relate to the opposite sex if they're straight, because they're being told basically men and women are the same. So I think this is really harmful, especially for young women, because they're going into these situations without a clear expectation of what men are actually like when it comes to sex. They're not going to be the same as us.
It's funny, in general, I agree with Debra, so that sex ed, comprehensive sex ed is a good thing for kids. It's just that schools have done such a horrifically bad job of it that in recent years, I tend to, really respect empirical, sort of facts on the ground. And it definitely they don't seem to be doing a good job of it. And I think you probably agree with that. You mentioned how, they deceive parents. In California, it's been shocking. I mean, when I went in and found, I talk about in the book, the ways they were deceiving parents. In 2019, the parents found out that there would be a new curriculum involving all kinds of sexual things, from blood play. They would be taught about blood play, all kinds of, anal sex, they would be taught masturbation. I mean, things that just really went beyond what you thought kids need to hear from their 7th grade teacher. And they had a protest. There was a major protest in Sacramento, and some of the most explicit books and really odd books were taken off the curriculum. And so, I was able to talk to various teachers, sort of undercover, whatever. Some of them didn't. I didn't use names and whatnot. And they showed me that these books had then been supplied to the teachers after they officially removed them through the virtual curricula that they supplied teachers. So the teachers, what was going on in the classroom was very different from what the parents were seeing. And you see this all over. I mean, I don't know, why would you want to? I mean, these teachers seem to have a savior complex, many of them, in which they think they are, teaching kids is boring, but saving lives through this, emancipation from I don't know, binary, biology is somehow more valorous.
Debra, so your book is called The End of Gender. What happens when we end gender? Do we fall or do we fly? Are we free? What happens?
Well, when I refer to the end of gender, it's probably not in the way that most people interpret the title to be. I'm referring to the end of our understanding of any sort of real, accurate understanding of gender, as opposed to the end of, say, gender norms. I think it's important for people to be able to pursue whatever they want in life, and whether that's gender typical or atypical, whether you're gender conforming or otherwise. But the title refers more so to this idea that science denial really has become such a problem that we do not have an accurate understanding of it, especially not in the mainstream. And I only see that problem getting worse as, I talk about how activism is infecting academia, it's affecting the kind of studies that are being produced. So that's only going to make things much, much worse going forward.
How do you see, I was just contacted a couple days ago by a parent at a school close to me, and she's a part of a sex-based rights, she called it sex-based rights advocacy group, and they were wondering how to find this stuff in the education system. How do you notice what it is? What are the key qualities of this teaching that you can notice that this is something that's not based on reality, or it's based on these other sets of ideas?
I would say the biggest thing, my book, I lay it out in terms of 9 different myths, and I talk about, these are myths that are very much widespread, that are pretty much taken at face value, but they are unscientific, they are not true, and any expert who knows the scientific literature knows that. So if there are experts who are saying something to the contrary, they're either activist scientists or they are promoting a false narrative because they think it's going to help particular communities. So in particular, I would say if you look at something like, if you look for keywords like gender is a spectrum, gender is fluid, gender is a social construct, I see a lot of that in sex ed curriculum, or I guess in California, it's under anti-bullying curriculum. Is that right, Abigail? So just those kinds of ideas. What else is there? That people can be more than one gender, that people's genders change, that genders due to traditional norms, things like that.
And it's, sometimes this is taught not even in a sex ed, very often isn't in a sex ed class. So parents have been sending me, I've been talking to different parents this week about sort of the woke takeovers of their children's school. And many of these parents are liberal parents. These are not right wingers. They send their kids to this school. And in one of the sort of toniest prep schools out here, they now have, a mother of a 7th grader sent me the introductory letter that her daughter's English teacher had sent to the class, in which this woman introduced herself as non-binary and told them the class would be the safe space, and that they should read books with an idea of, with the idea of looking to, for instance, whether Holden Caulfield was, noting the places that he was acting from privilege and whatnot. And you think, what on earth is going on? I mean, this is English class, right? So in English class, this woman's discussing her gender. She's discussing her sexuality. She introduced herself as queer. The lines of professionalism. I mean, we used to all agree that you don't talk about your sexuality with your 7th graders because it's really no one's business, and they're children, right? But somehow this one, if anybody who falls into sort of the idea of wokeness or LGBTQ, that's okay to talk about with 7th graders. Of course it's not. You don't, talk about, an adult shouldn't be up there discussing their sexuality with their 7th grade class. But even in regular standard English classes, this is going on across the country.
I think maybe where it started, it was potentially a good place in that they want to end the stigma around people who are different, especially for, I'd say, gay people who have in the past experienced a lot of discrimination in the workplace potentially. So to maybe say to kids, it's okay if you are this way, but, we can talk about non-binary too, because I think that's something that's something that needs to be talked about more honestly. And I know, Abigail, you discuss this in your book as well, that it's just, I think this movement is harming, especially young women. But on the whole, I don't think it's appropriate for teachers, especially if it's an English class, to show up to teach a bunch of 12-year-olds and you're talking about your gender identity that has no relevance to teaching about the Catcher in the Rye.
What is non-binary then, according to what you've seen?
Oh, when someone identifies as a different gender other than male or female. So either both or neither, or a mix of the two to some extent.
So it's still built out of male and female as the basic ingredients, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's still based on a binary model, essentially, because you're still referring to one of or two things, which, shows, I think, the lack of logic that goes behind the movement.
I do think a certain amount of this, stepping over boundaries comes from our impatience. It's like what Debra was just saying, which I thought was an amazing point, was that, this came out of something good. We recognize that, gay teens or sexual minorities might have felt uncomfortable or, afraid to be themselves and whatnot in a school. But the idea that a teacher then has to go in and in 7th grade help them come out is actually quite crazy. It really is, because when we in prior eras allowing, and I'm not talking about any harassment, abuse, or anything like that, because that should always be the business of a school, and the school must stop it. But letting someone decide their sexuality, we never thought that was something that the English teacher needed to help with, right? You let a kid figure it out. It's okay if you don't do anything. But today there are these people tasked with a mission, it seems. And I keep hearing from parents that they think it's their job to help the child come out, as if the project of educating our young is so boring or so unworthy or so easy that now they've moved on to this other thing.
And it's overstepping the boundaries too, I think, in terms of what the role of the parent is, because there's also that larger trend I'm seeing pretty much everywhere now, where if a child decides to transition at school, it specifically says, and say the policy to teachers, you do not tell the parents. And if the parents call, you refer to the child based on their legal name and their birth sex. You don't mention anything about transitioning. And I just think that's completely inappropriate, because parents deserve to know that stuff. And I understand the fear, before, say, if a child is gay, maybe the parents don't accept the child, and maybe they feel like they should have some responsibility in protecting these kids. But it has, again, gone so far in the other direction now, where in this case, especially, socially transitioning in these kids in many cases is not actually good for them.
That's kind of scary if you pair that with what you said earlier about if you can teach children something that's completely subjective, that's not based in objective truth, that they need basically a priest in order to understand the world. You give them these ideas that aren't really rooted in reality that they can figure out themselves. They have to go by a doctrine. So you take that, and then you take this institution that is grabbing more and more power from any other source. It's kind of swallowing an entire generation into this institution, or into a life where they need to be mitigated, or something needs to be between them and reality, and it has to be this collective institution. That sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it seems like it's kind of those two things together is kind of a recipe for something rather Orwellian.
Yeah. And I feel for the parents because in many cases they feel completely helpless. And in some cases, even the law is on the side of the educators in terms of removing parents from any sort of decisions about this stuff when it comes to their kids.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I have trouble not seeing this in conjunction with a number of things, not only sort of all norms falling apart, and boundary violations. We sort of feel like our sexuality is everybody's business, and even a seventh graders and whatnot. But also, we're having so few kids in the West. We're having, the younger generation, the same woke generation, is having far fewer kids. And Debra was just talking about the undercutting of parents, and there's been a real demonization of parents in the school system by young people who are generally not having kids. And on some level, I wonder if they just don't understand that when parents, and I'm talking about most parents, okay, I'm not talking about the abusers, but you're talking about people who give millions of hours to being with these children, to raising them, to making sure they're still alive year after year. And these are not, these are people who know their kids. And the idea that some professional who shows up for an hour and decides, oh, wait a second, everything that person who raised that kid, everything they think is wrong, I know the truth. The profound hubris of that, and the idea that they should be accepted, whereas the poor, schnook who actually raised the child should be completely undercut and ignored, is a very disturbing trend.
How have you both seen the proper way to confront this? Just let's imagine ourselves as parents with children in schools. What do you think is the proper way to push back against this indoctrination?
I tell my colleagues not to be afraid of being called a bigot, number one, because the administration doesn't even know what they're talking about. So I'll have colleagues reach out to me and they'll say, I don't know what to do. I'm at a loss because this is in my child's curriculum. I have nothing to show because if they're saying something like gender's a spectrum and they're showing me materials that are within the last few years that are supposedly proving this, how do I fight that? So in the end of gender, I do have, all the citations to studies to explain why no gender is binary. But outside of that, I would say don't be afraid to stand up and say this is not okay. If you have to remove your kids from the class, I think a lot of parents go along with it because they're afraid of being judged by other parents, or they don't want to seem like they're out of touch or that they are somehow discriminatory, which is completely ridiculous. But at the end of the day, it's your children and that's your right and that's your decision to make.
That's totally right. And also, I talk to a lot of parents, obviously, for my book. I talked to, well over 6 at this point. But for the book, I interviewed a little less than 6. And they're worried about losing custody. I mean, when a young woman goes through adolescence, I mean, I can tell you, I was a real handful for my mother. I mean, I got to tell you. And these girls, sometimes they just want to stick it to mom. And if the parents happen to be in a divorce and are on opposite sides of this, I talked to a woman a couple of weeks ago, and she was afraid of losing. She's really on the verge of losing custody because her daughter announced at 12 that she was trans, and the gender nonconforming mom, this is a very masculine mom. I've talked to her at length, and I know her occupation and whatnot. This is not not someone who insists on rigid gender roles. She said to her, honey, you're 12 years old. This isn't making sense that you're suddenly trans. I've known you since you were a kid. And she didn't go along with it. But the dad, who did not have custody, and the stepmom thought it was great. And now she's on the verge of losing custody. Literally, because the girl confided in her stepmom that she doesn't feel safe with mom, and they brought in a social worker. I mean, these are the kind of games that 14-year-old girls play with, to get rid of. I mean, they just do. I mean, they really want to stick it to mom. The problem is now we have an engine that will come in and take your child away if you're not going along with the party line. And these parents feel hopeless. They really do. They feel they're afraid they'll lose their jobs. They're afraid to lose custody. I mean, they are so isolated.
We have similar cases like that in Canada as well, and it's heartbreaking. I really feel for these parents because, I mean, in this case, it really is not in the best interest of these children, and we're going to see that eventually. And I can only imagine how it feels to be helpless in that position, because really you're fighting an uphill battle, and there's not a lot that you can do except to do as best as you can.
It's very scary. Not only can you lose your job, but you can lose your children. There's something about this that has captured, in a sense, our institutions or our apparatuses of justice in a way, and it's creeping. So when we have mermaids coming out and saying, okay, nobody's born in the wrong body, they might be trying to save face, but the repercussions of what they've been fighting for are going to be playing out over the course of years and over the course of lives. And you said something slightly ominous when you said something's coming. Like, what's coming? What do you guys think is going to come? And it seems like a lot of us have to sacrifice. There'll be a lot of people that have to sacrifice: the detransitioners, the people who speak up at their offices, the people who get fired, and then the court cases with parenting and stuff. How many of those have to stack up before this will be purged from our cultures?
I mean, I don't see a full purging for a while, even if they sue individual doctors. So the protocols may change, medical protocol. But as you said, this is still being pushed in schools very aggressively. There's a lot of gender confusion out there among young children. And, you know, I don't see our reliance on experts going away. I mean, the idea, look, are there bad and abusive parents who need to be, and the children where the children need to be protected from them? Of course. But right now, if a mom says she does not want her daughter to start a course of testosterone at 14, she's afraid to lose custody. That's an insane situation. And in the case of the mom I talked to, her daughter said, her daughter confided in the stepmom. She was in a rebellious period. She decided the stepmom was very in favor of transitioning and was very affirming. She had been, agreeing with the daughter, going along with the name and pronouns. And all she did was she said, well, maybe I think about suicide. And I've heard this from another of her parents. I think about suicide when I'm with my mom because she's not safe for trans people. And that is enough to just trigger an army. Well, as we know from statistics, there's a big difference between I think about suicide by a kid and any indication that they've actually made any steps towards attempting it, or that they have, but it is the kind of, it's the kind of threat that for a young teen can buy you complete liberation from all rules set for you by your parents.
I worry too about detransitioners and what's going to happen with them, because right now they're still not being taken seriously. And I'm really hoping that's going to change. I think at some point there are going to be so many of them that people are not going to be able to ignore them, or to say that you were never really gender dysphoric as they're told now, or told that this is a myth, or that they don't exist, or that it's so statistically rare that it doesn't matter. So that's my concern, because for the book, I wrote about them, and I just find their stories. I feel as a woman, it affects you in a way that's very unique to the experience of being a woman and growing up as a woman. Just as I think for a man, Benjamin, you could probably relate and understand a young man's trajectory in life and his experience growing up in a way that I couldn't. And so it's really sat with me to hear their stories and to see how they're being treated now when they do come out and say, this is what happened to me. And I don't understand why a movement that is normally championing people's quote unquote lived experience and talking about how it's really important to listen to a diverse set of voices, why these young women in particular, and young men too, are basically being shut down and told that they do not matter.
Yeah, that's totally right. I mean, the numbers of detransitioners are just growing, especially among young women. And look, I was not someone who got involved in drugs as in my teenage years, but mostly because it wasn't available. I mean, I think if I had grown up around constant drugs, I would have probably been doing drugs. And the same goes for this gender bending stuff. I mean, trying out new genders. There are these young women who are in a normal period of adolescence, which is very turbulent, are constantly being told they have alternatives. Here, try this. Who wouldn't? And so many women say, I would have chosen one of those other things.
Yeah, and especially for a lot of these women, their reason for choosing one of these other genders is because they feel different. And I don't know why people are not saying it's okay to feel different as a woman. We all felt different or uncomfortable with our bodies at some point. And that's a very normal part of womanhood, I think, especially when you're going through puberty, discomfort. You know, a lot of young women hate their breasts and are getting double mastectomies. And I'm thinking, well, for myself, I'm small breasted, but like my girlfriends who have larger breasts will say that they really didn't like them when they first started developing, and it's something you have to adjust to, and you know, you don't like the male attention that you're getting. And these are things that we should be saying to these young women, and especially at a time when there's such an emphasis on gender equality and women's rights. I just am completely flabbergasted that for young women who feel different or feel they don't fit in, they're being told, go ahead and be a man. Like, isn't that, why aren't people saying there's something wrong here? And for a lot of these young women, when you listen to their stories, or I think even when you listen to the stories of some of the young women who have transitioned very quickly to male, their reason for wanting to be male, it sounds more like they're trying to distance themselves from anything that's potentially female or feminine. It's not so much that they identify as male or they feel masculine, it's that they hate the thought of being a woman. And that is really upsetting to me. And that's why I think it's so important that we talk about this, because I want young women to know that there are alternatives, and that it's very normal to feel the way that you do, and you don't have to change anything about yourself.
Do you think that we could use some sort of, I guess it's more of a conversation, but some sort of story about what it is to be a woman? It seems like we've tried to intellectually break down these categories of gender because stereotypes are negative in this way or that way. Is there a possibility of us going back and trying to recreate gender in a positive light, or do we really have to let it go and get into a post-expectation, post-stereotype world? And is that proper for a young mind to conceive of a world without categories that are based on sex? Like, what do we give young people in order that would be stronger for them and yet flexible enough for them to be individuals?
I think so. I don't think the solution is to pretend like gender stereotypes don't exist or that there are no differences at the core between men and women. You know, I do talk and write a lot, and in the book I write about this, how there are biologically based differences on average between men and women in terms of what we see in the brain, in terms of what we see in behavior. And that's not to say that's justification for treating anyone differently and not to give everybody a fair chance, or to not to justify stereotypes. But at the same time, if you do fit into a stereotype, I don't think that should necessarily be a bad thing either. You know, the majority of women are feminine. I think it should be totally fine to be a feminine woman. But instead, women are being told if you're feminine, there's something wrong with you and you should be masculine because it's more socially acceptable to be like a man. So in that way, I think it's just a healthy acceptance of what the truth is, but also saying that shouldn't limit us in terms of the choices we make or the choices we allow children to make.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think that we spend altogether all too much time thinking about ourselves today. But especially young kids. Wow. I mean, you know, they should be busy. They should be out doing stuff. They should not be thinking about what they how they feel every second of every day. It's so extreme. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, when my kids started school, they decided at, you know, my kids' school that they needed to bring in a psychologist to talk to the kids about their anxiety for, you know, about COVID. Well, you can imagine what that produces, anxiety about COVID. We spend so much time talking about our feelings and taking our temperature that these kids are never allowed to ignore any normal human discomfort. And let's be honest, are we feel uncomfortable even after we pass through adolescence? There's tons of discomfort in our bodies, especially for women. So, you know, anything that, you know, young women wrote about this in their diaries or used to talk about it with their girlfriends. Now they take it online and they talk about it in public. And it's a much, much worse situation. And all kinds of adults are weighing in with these children. They're either celebrating them or encouraging all kinds of bad things, including sending pictures and whatnot. This is not where adolescence is supposed to occur. It's not supposed to occur among a lot of, you know, strangers and adults who weigh in on your sexuality. It really should occur in private and you know, by reading books and whatnot. And anything we can do to have these kids stop focusing on themselves for as much time as possible would seem to do them a lot of good.
I think the role of social media and pornography has been very influential with this whole acceptance of the gender ideology and wanting to not identify as a woman as well. And that's another thing I think needs to be talked about, because I'm amazed. Like, I feel, Abigail, you and myself, we're like two very few people who are calling this out. I don't see, in terms of the gender stuff, of course, if you're really young, you've never had sex, and you think that pornography is an accurate depiction of what sex is going to be like with a man, of course you're going to say, no, that's not for me. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be potentially degraded like that. So I used to write for Playboy. I have no issue with pornography for adults, but definitely for children, I'm concerned about the effects and how that affects their development. I'm concerned about how it affects young men's expectations of sex. And I think young women already are being flooded by so many messages about what they're supposed to look like, and with social media especially, that ramps it up so much in terms of not just celebrities, but in terms of their peers. And there's so much pressure in that way. And it's important for young women to know that, one, pornography is not going to be indicative of what real life sex is. I mean, hopefully not. I mean, in some cases, I'm hearing stories of and we're seeing in terms of what young women are reporting, that sometimes it is like that, which it shouldn't be, and that's another issue, I think. But just to know that should not be influencing whether or not you identify as female. That's something so separate.
Yeah, the porn you see online is really scary. It involves things like choking. It's scary to adult women, let alone children. 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, these girls are seeing it. It's terrifying. And we made fun of the kind of stuff that, I was born in 1978, and I grew up, my teenage years with the 90s, and, sort of make fun of all the rom-coms that were so popular then. But you know what? They made sex and all those things look positive. And today, what they have in place of that is a lot of confusion and terrifying porn. And as with Debra So, I don't have any issue with things like Playboy. I mean, it just doesn't bother me. I'm not against all pornography and whatnot, but the scary stuff they have online, it's really disturbing kids, and frankly, it's even disturbing, young adults.
So, Debra, you say several times that you're sex positive in your book and your writing. That doesn't mean that anything goes. Could you define sex positivity and how there is self-control embedded in that, or some guidance around what it is to be healthy with regards to one's sexuality?
So when I say I'm sex positive, what I mean by that is that I think human sexuality should be celebrated. I don't think it should be stigmatized. I don't think there should be any shame around having sex or talking about sex. But I do think it's okay to have boundaries. I don't think having sexual boundaries is necessarily sex negative. I have seen some aspects of discourse where people think if you are saying, like, my research expertise was paraphilias, which are unusual sexual preferences. And I've seen some aspects of discourse where people will say, if you are not into a particular kink, that's kink shaming, that's sex negative. And I don't think that's true. I think as much as we should be accepting of people who may have different sexual preferences, so long as they're consensual, I think if you're vanilla like me, I think that should be totally acceptable too. And I think it's totally fine if someone says, that's great for other people, that's not for me.
And I'll tell you something else Debra said that I totally agree with, is that, we've come to this place where everyone has a hair trigger to call, or the woke crowd has a hair trigger to call everyone a bigot, and good people are terrified of being called that. And we just need to get over that. If it's not true, it just shouldn't worry you. Now, that's easy for me to say. A lot of people are really afraid of losing their jobs over it, and I respect that. But at the end of the day, we have to start standing up to this. If you're not a bigot, I have a lot of transgender adults I'm friends with. I'm very comfortable with transgender adults. I have no issue with them at all. I don't even, I'm happy for them to transition or whatever, makes them comfortable. The idea that, I should shut up because somebody somewhere called me a transphobe, and usually it's a 20-year-old who hasn't read my book, is just ridiculous. That's not the sort of thing that I would, I would ever let stop me. And because it can't. At some point, we have to be able to talk about these things.
I thought it was interesting because you interviewed Michael Bailey in your book. So Mike Bailey is a former colleague and a friend of mine, and he was saying how this whole PC aspect of language is in some ways, I think, very smart because it makes people constantly afraid. And so I think he was saying something like, people are constantly apologizing, and you can't have clear conversations as a result. And I think that's very clever on some level, because I think in some cases these people don't even know what they stand for or what they're saying. Like you're saying, they're attacking you, they've never read your book, they're just saying the things that they think they're supposed to say, that their friends are saying. And by them policing language, it helps them not have to ever justify or actually educate themselves about any of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's the ultimate gaslight, right? If you can make a population say, no, up is down, 2 + 2 = 5, and man is woman, wow, you've got everyone under control. And so I do think that when they decide that you repeat after me, this man is a woman, and they try to make everyone say that, they've won a tremendous amount of good ground in terms of controlling everyone.
Earlier this year, I received an email asking me to interview specifically women to talk about or to get advice for a professional woman to have the confidence to speak out. And you both seem kind of rather independent. You're both writers, so you get to... I don't know how beholden you are to institutions to make your way, but what advice do you have for standing your ground on these things and thinking about professionals out there who might be risking their job? What should they keep in mind, and what values should they hold to in speaking out?
I think that, honestly, people who have stood up to this nonsense have done incredibly well. Trader Joe's did incredibly well by saying, I'm sorry, we're not getting rid of our Trader Jose brands. Our customers really like it. It's not offensive. You're being ridiculous, effectively. And they did well. And, look, the mainstream media sort of has a, cloak of silence around, certainly my book. I don't want to speak for Debra, but,
definitely mine too.
Right. I mean, I would think, they refused to review our books. They refused to mention it. It was policy at a number of the newspapers. I was told, because a lot of people wanted to review, asked to review my book, asked for a copy, whatever, including top journalists. And they were told no. And I feel very fortunate that we live in a time that we have this alternative media, and we can go on places like Joe Rogan, and you know what? They have bigger audiences. And they have bigger audiences because they're authentic and they're true, and people are tired of the party line, which is coming out of our mainstream media, which is a whole lot of nonsense. I think that, companies should stand up to this, and I think the leadership in companies should stand up to this. I never tell anyone to put their job on the line. I'm a journalist. I always say, if you want, send me the documents, keep your job. But the heads of corporations should absolutely stand up to their really spoiled 20-year-olds who seem to be running the show.
Yeah, I think it's cowardice, because the thing is, I don't believe most people are actually on board with any of this stuff. I don't think most people are on board with cancel culture. I don't think most people are buying this gender nonsense. So I think if more people just said what they thought, we wouldn't have this problem. So I totally get it. I mean, I built my life in a way that I could say what I think. I left academia for that reason. I feel very fortunate now to be able to work as a journalist and have. I mean, it's sad when I think about it that I have more ability to speak to the science now as a journalist than I did as an academic scientist. But I think if that's something important to you, you will find a way to make it work for yourself, no matter what the consequences are, no matter how many obstacles you face. And at the end of the day, I know that I sleep better as a result of it. I never have to worry about losing friends or that people are going to judge me when they find out what I really think. I have lost friends in the past, but that happens in the beginning. And then after that, you make new friends. So it really doesn't matter, and it's just that overall feeling like when I meet people who don't have that same freedom and how it affects them, not just say in the workplace, it bleeds out into your personal life. It bleeds out into other areas and how you feel overall. And I think it doesn't sit well with a person when they don't feel like they can be honest about who they are. So I would say if someone is considering it, just to know that, you can make it work. People will come out and support you. That would be my advice.
So faith and bravery, in a way.
Yeah.
Why gender? Why did gender become that which young people are being obsessed about? Where do you guys see the history of this conversation? How did it come about? What's the etiology of this obsession?
I think from a sexological perspective, so sexology is the scientific study of sex and gender, this was one topic that experts did not want to push back on because of the history that we've had. So, in the book I talk about Michael Bailey, I mentioned earlier in this conversation, and how he was basically the poster child, I think, as to why experts really, after they saw what happened to him, so for your audience, he wrote a book that challenged some of the very cherished narratives of trans ideology, and so the activists really went after him really ruthlessly. And since then, very few people are willing to say anything that makes activists upset, trans activists upset, because they don't want the same thing to happen to them. So in that way, I think that's why it's gone unchecked for so long. And I think for most in the field, I can't speak for everyone, but I would definitely say from my time having been a sex researcher, I don't think anyone predicted it was going to be like this. It has always been it's always been understood that you don't want to go there. You don't want to go there with your research, and if you do, you're going to pay a price for it. But I don't think we saw it becoming as bad as it's become.
Do you think that it could have been slowed down if the scientists and the academics had formed a bulwark? And do you think that there was a crossover? Like they could have caused some sort of wall to happen before it reached the young generation, or at least the medical field and how the medical field treats the young generation?
I do. And I mean, I have colleagues like Ray Blanchard, and I wrote about him. I wrote about my colleague and friend Kevin Sue. They've been very fearless in pushing back and still pursuing research that is important and meaningful and honest. And the activists go after them. And I think I feel bad saying this because I don't want it to sound like I'm criticizing colleagues who didn't do this, but I do think it would have made a difference. Of course it would, because there would be more of a balance in terms of the conversation that we're seeing.
I think when researchers speak up, it's tremendously important. Obviously, there are very few. I mean, Debra is, in a really small company of experts who are willing to speak up about this, and scientific researchers who have real integrity on this issue. But I would say this is really fueled by social media as far as the kids are concerned. This is not fueled by sexuality developing. It's fueled by an identity obsession that we have. So now we are introducing all kinds of nonsense identities like non-binary, which are basically a social media creation. Everyone gets to choose one of 42 genders, and everyone's having fun doing it because they live their lives online, and their newest identity is the most important aspect of them. As far as they're concerned, that is the signal feature of a person, is their identity and their diagnosis. Sometimes it's a diagnosis, sometimes it's a sexual identity, but that's how they relate to each other, young kids. And because of social media, that's what they're on, and that's what it facilitates. So the combination of young people on social media has been honestly pretty disastrous in terms of their confusion, and it's been horrible for young women.
What you said earlier about when you described, I think, Debra, you might have been describing kind of loosely the ROGD phenomena or subphenomena of that, meaning that a lot of young women who gravitate towards the trans identity do so not because they love the male principally, but because they want to escape the female. And it seems to be kind of an inverted shadow of the autogynephilia type of male who really wants to become a woman because he adores the woman. Do you see any research about that? It doesn't seem like to be a paraphilia when a woman wants to escape her sex, but is there kind of some sort of psychological category that we can that's being researched or that we can understand this phenomena?
For women, so for people born female who identify as male, you will have, similar to with male to female, there's the early onset. So these are people who are born, they're girls who are very masculine from a young age. They're more male typical. So there's that trajectory. There's another subtype, which is called autohomoerotic gender dysphoria, which is of young women born female who have eroticized the idea of being a gay man having sex. So this is something that I found very confusing when I first heard about this, and so Ray Blanchard has done some research on this. Because as a straight woman, I grew up in the gay community. All my friends were gay men. I could never picture wanting to have sex with any of my friends, as much as I love them. I mean, to me, the relationship a straight woman has with a gay man is very special, but it's definitely not sexual. So my understanding is these young women are sexually attracted to gay men or their gay male friends, and so they transition to have sex with their gay male friends. So that's one aspect of it. My understanding is it's also because of the influence of pornography. These young women don't want to be dominated by a male partner. They don't want to be penetrated by a male partner. So instead, if they take on the male role, they see themselves as more equal to a male partner. So it also comes down to sexual orientation. So the early onset, these girls are usually attracted to women. So I'm not saying this very well, but they're born female, transition to male, attracted to women. That's the early onset subtype. And then so this second subtype that I'm talking about is born female. They choose to transition to male, but they're attracted to men. So it's analogous in a way to the male to female typology, in that is also broken up based on sexual orientation. So that if you the early onset, again, they're born male, identifies female, attracted to men. And then with autogynephilia, born male, identifies female, attracted to women.
Right. And then we have the rapid onset, which is, what I wrote my book about, which is generally neither of those. These are, lonely, precocious girls who have no idea what their sexuality is. They spend all their time with mom. They don't spend very much time with other teenagers, but they go online, and that's when they decide maybe they're, something other than female. It's not coming from an organic place of, sexuality exploration. They are very, very young. Even at 14, they're more like sort of 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds of prior generations, because they haven't been on their own very much, and certainly not with other kids in person. So, what we're seeing is really, among that population is really like a hysteria, a fad.
I do think for some of the ROGD girls that they may fall into the autohomoerotic category, in that, again, it's wanting to escape being female and being sexualized as a female. So instead they become male.
Yeah, that's totally possible. And I don't disagree with that. I just think, when we talk about, a lot of them, it really is coming from something other than, sexuality.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
What are some of the hopeful things that you've seen that might be combative on that level, on the level of that hive mind of youth? Are there ideas that are shaping? Are you, either of you, aware of tides changing within that discourse? And are there different narratives that you think might be helpful for people to avoid kind of being swept up in that?
Well, I think the biggest change that I've seen is from the parents. When you say the truth, it really is like lancing a blister. Everyone just feels so much relief. And, a lot of, parents who've contacted me since reading my book are so relieved. Some of these people had no idea it was all over the country. It was just something they were going through with their adolescent. And they are so relieved that someone's willing to say so, that they can point to, a source, a book or whatever, and say, I'm not crazy. And so I think it will, it depends on the age of these kids, because it's different at different ages. But when they feel relief that they don't have to honor their 11 or 12-year-old daughter's every proclamation about her identity, they feel so much relief. So I think that has been a really, positive thing that I've seen.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and also say for the parents who tell me the relief at knowing that they are not transphobic, because they've been told if you don't go along with this, you are a bad parent, you're a bad person. They're being told their child's going to commit suicide and that they hate trans people, and just for them to know that no, it's okay to have these instincts as a parent and to be critical of this, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're a bad parent for doing so.
Did you guys have anything to ask each other?
Oh, that'd be fun.
I can stop being the Chris Wallace in this conversation.
You know what I want to ask you, Abigail? What was the process like for you emotionally? Because you did write a bit about this, but how did you find it from start to finish in terms of, when you're doing a deep dive into this stuff? Because I found it so difficult, like emotionally. It really surprised me how upset I found it, or how upset I would get when I was doing the research for this, because I think it does touch on something. I think that we feel as women that this is in some way universal for us, or maybe not. Maybe that was just me, but I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. It definitely was an emotional roller coaster. I think the hardest part for me, when I'm writing, I tend to shut things out. I'm a sort of natural introvert. I tend to write, at night when I'm alone, and I sort of managed to shut out the world. But once the book came out, I couldn't do that. And everybody wanted to talk to me, or a lot of people wanted to talk to me. And the parents in some sense were the hardest, because sometimes I couldn't help them. There wasn't anything I could do, and I can offer resources, and I could offer, it can refer them to psychologists and support groups, and I do that. But when the whole school has been, affirming your child for a year, when the therapist has, or when she's 19 and left the house and started a course of testosterone, these parents are at a breaking point. I mean, I've had fathers call me who feel like they're on the brink of a nervous breakdown, because I think their daughter's harming herself and she's going to regret it, and they can't do anything, and no one will listen to them. And even though she's technically an adult, but actually she's more like a 14-year-old, she's very immature and whatnot. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. And there's nothing I can do. And that was the hardest for me. I don't know what your experience was.
I would say it was hearing the detransitioner stories, but then also with the parents, like you're saying, feeling helpless, feeling like there's really not a lot that you can do. And especially if so many parents have asked me for advice. So the one chapter I wrote specifically on this, which is chapter 5, and I opened the chapter by talking about a parent who approached me and asking me, and I just didn't feel like I could say, because his child was on puberty blockers, and I just didn't feel it's appropriate for me to tell him. He obviously knew my view to some extent, but it just doesn't feel right. And, I'm not the parent of that child, and I don't even really know him, or I've never met the child. So just feeling like in many cases, trying to draw attention to this, but also feeling in some ways like there's only so much as a journalist that I can do, and just hoping that it will make a difference.
Well, I love that chapter in your book. And I thought the way you handled it was wonderful, because not only because then you came forward in the book and gave the advice that you would have given to parents when it wasn't sort of in the personal context of that one person. And I really admired the book and very much how you handled that. It's funny, it's hard too, because these parents are so different. Some of them are so up in their kids' business. And I don't mean up in their business in the sense that, of course, we all want to know what's going on with our kids, whatever. But I have had calls from parents who will say things like, my daughter, she graduated from college. She doesn't have a job. She lives at home. She goes to school, but she works for me part-time. That's her only job. And she doesn't have a car or whatever. You go through this list of a very infantilized teenager. And then the mom says, and now she says she's non-binary. What do I do? And I want to say, look, she's 19 and you're driving her crazy. Like, she doesn't have any breathing room in her life. And you want to know why she's saying she's non-binary. Like, occasionally I will talk to that kind of parent and I think, oh my God, I would want to transition. Like, I can't deal with this. Like, please give me freedom. And, look, there's a lot of helicoptering in this generation. There's no question. And I do it too. I mean, there are a lot of cultural reasons for it. But, sometimes some of the parents are certainly getting in their own way by really suffocating these teenagers and giving them no other avenue for, individuation.
I have to say your book was really funny too. I loved when you were talking about when you first started trying on bras, and you were describing how like the engineering was more important than look, or you were describing pornography too at one point. And you were saying about how it's the woman's look of like frozen ecstasy. It's just hilarious. It's obviously very serious subject matter, but to have like those little breaks where it was really funny was great.
Thanks. I wanted to ask you how's it been for you since the book came out?
It's been, I expected that there was going to be pushback, but I try to focus on the positive aspects, and I'm happy that it got out, number one, because I was afraid it was going to get pulled. And it's just been, we just keep going at this point.
Do you think you'll return to this subject area, or?
I feel like it's going to be, it's an issue that's on a personal level, I feel important to me. So probably, I think, whatever I end up doing next, I probably will always come back to this in some way, or it'll always still be relevant to me, or it's something I'll always talk about just because I feel so passionately about it. But yeah, in terms of my next few projects, I'm working on something else. I don't want to say what it is yet, but it'll be probably quite different from what people are used to from me. But in some ways, I think that'll be a good thing. What about you?
I think I'm interested in writing on this generation again, but not from the same angle. And it was interesting, being a young woman sort of in, distress, or, going through a hard time was something that was sort of personal to me, but the overall topic was not personal to me. That enabled me to write it. Sometimes people assume that I had some personal stake in this. I have to tell you that, I tend to avoid issues in which I have a personal stake, because it's hard for me to write about them in a calm fashion. I don't think I would be able, God forbid, I was going through this, sudden onset thing with one of my kids. I don't think I could write about it in a calm way. I don't think I could sustain my, sort of important objectivity and openness for the course of the book. I mean, the parents I talked to, I interviewed a lot of the trans influencers in the book, and I talked about a lot of trans influencers. I interviewed some, and parents hate them. They absolutely hate them. They think you came into my home and you destroyed my child. And I was able to write about them. I don't hate influencers. I actually really like the ones that I spoke to. I think that I didn't feel the same way. I kind of thought, what, these kids are given a platform, these sometimes very confused kids, and they're only in their early 20s, they're very young, are given a platform in which they can talk to millions of confused children. And I think that's the problem, not that these kids are so terrible.
That's, I would say, one of the blessings of being a columnist, in that I can be a little bit more opinionated and say what I think and have my own voice, because I think, similar to what you're saying, if I had to be an objective reporter, I think objective reporting is rare right now, just because of how polarized everything is. But I think you really have to, I just like that I don't have to sit necessarily pull back how I feel. I can say how I really feel.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Was there a big worry about your book being pulled, Debra?
I was definitely concerned about it. When I signed my book deal, I didn't tell anybody. I told maybe 3 people in my life, because I was very concerned, because I had seen that happen to other people, and I just thought that can't happen in this case. So yeah, I'm really, really glad that didn't happen.
As authors, have you either of you heard rumors of some sort of stipulation within these book deals to protect authors from the cancelers? Do you think that was necessary, or if it's in the works? Because one after another, authors are getting suppressed or deplatformed.
Whether there should be something like that in the contract?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
Should there be? Is there? Do you think that's necessary? Do you think that we can have a functioning media without some sort of insulation from the crowds that are kind of controlling the conversations? Do you guys want to see that, Deb?
Oh, I mean, we publishers need to get a backbone right away, because right now our publishing houses are being held hostage. I mean, I know when my book started out, when I first submitted my book proposal, I got a call right away from a major publishing house, a very liberal man who was the head of the publishing house, and I was really excited. I mean, it was a big deal for me. It was a big publishing house. The conversation went great. We talked for over an hour, and it was like an hour or so after I had submitted the proposal. And he had heard about the phenomenon of the sudden, epidemic of teen girls identifying, because he had read an article about it, and he had 4 daughters and whatnot, or he had some number of daughters and whatnot. And then I thought, wow, that's it. That's going to be my book. That's going to be my publisher. And 2 days later, my agent got a call, and his staff had threatened to walk out. And that's what's happening. That's been happening across the board with publishing houses. I was very lucky. I went with a wonderful publisher who stood by me. But that is a huge risk for authors, and frankly, it's a huge risk for publishers, because at some point, people are going to stop wanting to read the party-approved stuff that they're pumping out.
Do you guys think that journalism is going to change in a better direction? I'm sorry, Debra, what were you going to say?
That's okay. In terms of whether journalism is going to get better, I'm hoping that after the election it might be, but I don't know. I'm skeptical. It's such a polarized time right now. I don't recall a time when it's been this bad, but at the same time, I'm still getting there in my career. So yeah. I hope it gets better, because I just don't think, I think it really affects the credibility of the industry or of our profession when people know, like, as Abigail was saying, like, people know it's not, it's just really biased, right? It's really biased.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's good and bad that, on the one hand, so many of our mainstream media outlets have lost credibility, and they're not being read because everybody knows that they've essentially been taken over by all these strictures on what you're not allowed to say. On the other hand, they had real apparatuses for fact checking, for editing. They were very good. And now everyone's moving to these other outlets, which at least allow you to say what you think. But there isn't the level of fact checking, and there isn't the level of rigor in place at a lot of these, a lot of these publications. So they're unlikely to reach the high level of either in terms of writing or in terms of rigor of our old, our older publications. So we have a choice between authenticity and a real rigorous apparatus, and unfortunately, I think that the authenticity is winning, which is not unfortunate. Sorry, that's a good thing, but it does come as a price. I think that a lot of these newspapers gave away something very, very precious.
Well, both your books really work very well together. They kind of pick up and drop each other off in this ballet of information. And
I see them like sisters in a way.
Yeah.
That's right.
Separated at, birth, but they converge at some point in life. That's for sure. Do you guys have anything that is coming up next that people can be aware of? I'll plug the books. Are there? We're in such a weird time with all of these virtual meetings and stuff. So I don't know if there's conferences or anything going on. But is there anything else that you guys have that people can go or look forward to?
I guess I would just plug my social media. So I'm at Dr. Debra So on Twitter, at Dr. Debra W. So on Instagram. My website is drdebraso.com, and you can get The End of Gender on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, indie booksellers, everywhere. And as I mentioned, I'll be launching some new things coming soon that I will post about on social media.
Yeah, I'm just Abigail Shrier, at Abigail Shrier on Twitter, and I'm always writing. So I've got some things coming out, and that's the best place to look for me. And the book's available, of course, Amazon and wherever books are sold.
I do have to say, I read half your book, Debra, and I listened to the other half. I kind of picked up and picked on, and you don't have a discernible accent until you get to the word sorry. And it just kind of popped right out. It was really adorable.
Really?
I just had to tell you that.
That's hilarious. I think you sometimes hear it in my O's a bit, but that's so Canadian too, for it to be sorry, the word sorry.
Yeah, that was... Well, thank you both for showing up and allowing me to have you both on.
Thanks so much. It's great to see you, Debra. And
yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having.
It's so great to see you too, and I'm excited for us to just all be in touch forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the end of the recording. Again, thanks again, both of you guys.
Thank you. This was such a great idea, and thank you, Abigail, for agreeing to do it.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed this product, consider donating to this channel via paypal.me/Benjamin Boyce or joining me on Patreon. Also follow me on Twitter at Benjamin A. Boyce. Have a good night.